The wind was always restless on the edge of town, like it too wanted to escape but never quite could. It stirred the brittle grass, whispered along the clapboard houses, and carried stories no one dared speak aloud. That evening, it brought with it a silence more unsettling than gunfire, heavy as sorrow and sharp as dry bone. Ellen stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded over the apron she hadn't taken off, though the stew was long gone cold on the stove. Her eyes weren't on the horizon so much as beyond it, somewhere far past the dusty plain, somewhere green, perhaps, or at least quiet. Her skin held the sun's memory, though the fire behind her eyes had dulled over years of trying too hard and getting too little. She did not cry. She hadn't in weeks. It had been squeezed out of her like water from a stone. Behind her, Helena sat on the step with her knees drawn tight to her chest, skirt hem dragging in the dirt, face slack with the confusion that lives between childhood and knowing too much. 19 years old, barely, with a heart like spun glass, clear, delicate, and always in danger. She'd stopped asking questions 3 days ago. That was the day her father took to town again, full of whiskey and ruin, wearing the coat he saved for losing. They heard the hooves before they saw them. 4 riders, slow, deliberate. A 5th horse followed without a rider, black as ash, saddle empty. The girl stood. Ellen did not. The gambler was first down. Slim shoulders, stained collar, a man once handsome but now thinned by poor choices and bad sleep. He didn't look at his wife or daughter. He looked at the man beside him, the one who did not dismount, the one who surveyed the yard like he already owned it. Jedediah Rourke. Jed was not loud. He didn't need to be. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and drain it of all warmth. Leather gloves, dark coat, dustless boots. His hair was graying but his back was straight, eyes pale as morning frost, and colder still. His men fanned out silently, 2 behind him, 1 staying near the gate. Ellen's hand went to Helena's shoulder. The girl didn't move. "Your husband has made an agreement," Jed said, voice low and sharp enough to slice silence. "Not a trade, no. A debt. Cleared." Ellen felt the breath leave her but didn't gasp. That would have given him too much. Instead, she stepped off the porch and stood beside her daughter. She looked at the gambler, the man she'd married out of desperation, and the years rolled through her like dust through fence slats. He couldn't meet her eyes. Just said something about owing too much, about being out of time, about this being better than what those men would have done. He'd signed the paper. That was all that mattered now. Jed nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and held out 2 pairs of worn gloves. "You'll need these," he said. "The road to the ranch is long, and the sun don't forgive." Helena tried to step back, but Ellen steadied her. "Not yet," she whispered, the words barely formed. "Not now. Be still." They walked. No handcuffs, no rope. Just presence, force, the weight of ownership. Helena cried only once, and it wasn't from fear. It was when she saw the horse her father had taken from her 6 months earlier, sold for whiskey and cards, tied up behind Jed's wagon, marked with a new brand. It was too much. The town watched. They always did. From behind curtains, through cracked doors. Eyes like shadows. Not one stepped forward. 2 cowboys leaned against the saloon wall, boots dusty, hats low. One was young, fidgeting with the strap of his saddlebag. The other older, quiet, unmoved. He watched not with curiosity, but recognition. As if he'd seen this before, too many times, and each time it carved a little more out of him. Luke was his name. Most folks just called him that. No one knew if it was first or last. Just Luke. The younger one, Caleb, shifted his jaw like he was chewing words he couldn't spit out. When Helena passed him, he looked down. Luke didn't. Jed's ranch was 2 days east, near the canyons. They slept in a spare cabin the first night, a single room with a cot and a floor blanket. Ellen let Helena have the cot. She sat against the wall, knees drawn, awake until the stars faded. The silence between them was full, not empty. There was nothing to say yet. Only breathing. Only being. The second day, Jed spoke more. Told them how things worked. Told Ellen she would cook and clean and maintain the ledgers. Told Helena she would be left alone, for now, until she proved herself useful. He made it sound polite, like it wasn't a cage being built word by word. When they arrived, the ranch looked like any other. Wide pens, long barns, a house big enough for 10. But it felt like a tomb, clean, quiet, and cold. A woman stood at the top of the steps. Mabel Rourke, Jed's sister. Late 50s, face like a dry creek, eyes sharp. She didn't smile, but she didn't look cruel either. Just tired. She nodded once, turned, and went back inside. Ellen and Helena were given a room in the back. No lock. But not a door that closed all the way either. That night, after hours of sweeping and sorting and feeding livestock, Ellen sat by the window. Helena slept beside her. The stars looked the same here. But the silence didn't. It was too still. Like the land held its breath. Back in town, Luke sat outside the bunkhouse, sharpening a blade not because it needed it, but because his hands couldn't stay still. Caleb paced. "We could do something," Caleb said, again. Like he had the night before, and the one before that. Luke said nothing. "She's just a girl," Caleb hissed. Luke nodded, slow. But his eyes were on the horizon. Watching. Waiting. Back at the ranch, Ellen held a broken comb in her lap. It had been hers since Helena was born. She used to hum while braiding her daughter's hair. She hadn't hummed in years. She wanted to now. But it stuck in her throat. Helena woke just before dawn. She touched her mother's hand and whispered, "I'm scared." Ellen didn't lie. So she only said, "I know." Then she brushed Helena's hair with the old comb. Gentle strokes. Like music. Like forgiveness. They heard footsteps. Jed again, asking for coffee. No anger. No threats. Just presence. He lingered at the door, watching. Helena looked away. Ellen met his eyes. "I don't break easy," she said, soft as a lullaby. He didn't reply. Just walked on. The wind came again that afternoon, curling around the window panes, lifting skirts of dust and swirling it into the distance. Ellen watched it dance across the field and felt something she hadn't in years. Not hope. Not yet. But awareness. Of movement. Of breath. Of the fact that things, even terrible things, did not stay still forever. That night, Helena found a small scrap of paper beneath the blanket on her cot. It had one word. She looked to her mother. Ellen didn't ask who or how. She only pressed the paper to her lips and nodded once. Out on the far side of the ranch, behind the last row of fences, someone had left a length of rope knotted just so, hanging from the edge of the corral gate. Luke never signed his name. He didn't have to. And the wind carried the rest. Dust gathered in the corners of every room at Rourke Ranch, even though Ellen swept twice a day. It wasn't dirt from neglect. It was older than that, finer, like ash from a fire long gone out. It lived in the beams, in the creases of the curtains, in the quiet places behind doors. It remembered things no one spoke aloud. And it never left. Ellen moved like a ghost through the house, silent, efficient, eyes low. She cleaned the same stairwell each morning, polished the same pewter handles, folded linen with sharp corners and no complaint. But her silence was not surrender. It was strategy. She was learning the rhythm of the place, the way shadows shifted through the halls, the sound of Jed's boots on the floorboards, the times of day when the locks turned and the key was left carelessly on a hook by the kitchen. Helena, kept mostly to the garden shed in back, was allowed outside only under supervision. Jed said she needed time to understand her place. What he meant was control. She wasn't to speak to the stable hands. Wasn't to go near the fence line. Her window was nailed shut from the outside. Still, Helena listened. And Ellen remembered. They had always shared more than blood. Quiet glances, codes, a language of eyebrows and small hand movements. Every breakfast plate became a message. Every change in their routine became a map. Jed's world was built on order. He believed in hierarchy, in roles set like stones. His cattle were marked, his records inked in perfect lines, his employees paid in silver coins stacked neat in a box. But Ellen could see the cracks in it all. Mabel was one of them. Jed's sister was not cruel, but not warm either. Her face wore the lines of someone who had waited too long for change. She managed the accounts, ran the kitchen when Ellen wasn't there, and sometimes watched the girl from the porch without saying a word. One evening, as Helena passed with an armful of washed shirts, Mabel handed her a lemon drop wrapped in wax paper. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. The men on the ranch avoided Ellen. Not out of fear, but a kind of respectful distance. They called her Miss Ellen, never ma'am, never anything else. Some of them looked away too quickly. Others held their gaze too long. She took note of both, and of one man in particular, Old Red, a stable hand with white in his beard and breath that whistled when he laughed. He said little, but twice he left extra oats for Helena's favorite mare, the one Jed hadn't yet sold off. Back in town, Luke worked the same as ever. Mended fences, hauled barrels, helped Caleb reshoe a spooked gelding with a ruined hoof. But his thoughts were elsewhere. Always elsewhere. Caleb noticed. "She's still out there," Caleb muttered one morning while tightening a saddle strap. "Don't pretend you don't know it." Luke didn't reply, just leaned against the fence, fingers trailing over the grain of the wood. His face was weathered, not from age but exposure, to sun, wind, silence. His eyes were unreadable, the kind that had seen too much and said too little. But that afternoon, when the church bell rang for the hour, he turned his head toward the east, toward Rourkeland. Jed continued to test Ellen. He asked questions designed to trip her up, about payroll, supply counts, recipes. But she never faltered. She was not just surviving, she was studying him. Every comment, every pause, every cruel little smirk. She filed them all away. One night, he asked her to sit at the dinner table instead of eating in the kitchen. Mabel stiffened, but said nothing. Ellen sat. Jed poured wine. His fingers brushed hers. "Do you miss him?" he asked, meaning the gambler. Meaning the man who sold her like livestock. Ellen looked down at her glass. "No," she said. Her voice did not shake. Jed smiled. It was not a kind smile. Afterward, she scrubbed her hands until they burned. Helena, meanwhile, found her own small rebellions. She loosened a board behind her cot, slipped a sliver of a mirror inside, wrote on the underside in coal from the stove, "Soon." A single word. A promise. She began leaving notes where she knew Ellen would find them. In the hem of her apron, tucked beneath the broom. Words like ready and rope. Ellen answered in kind. Wait and watch. Then one morning, a shift. Old Red passed Ellen on the way to the barn and muttered without meeting her eyes, "North fence needs mending. Gates loose." She didn't speak, just nodded. That night, after Jed had retired, she crept out beneath the porch slats and followed the dark until her feet met the old boards of the north fence. There, tied around the base of a fence post, was a single twist of rawhide. It hadn't been there before. And beside it, pressed into the dirt, a boot print. Not Jed's. Not his men's. Too careful. Too familiar. Luke had been here. She returned to the house with her breath held tight and her spine upright. Across the yard, Helena watched from her window. She had loosened the bottom hinge just enough to move the glass. She saw her mother return. She felt something shift in her chest, sharp and full of light. The next day, Jed left for town. Said he'd be gone until dusk. Mabel took over the ledgers, gave Ellen a list of errands that didn't need doing. But Ellen accepted them. While the house was still, Ellen took the kitchen knife, the small one, sharp and narrow, and slipped it into her boot. Helena watched the gate. The men were elsewhere, out driving cattle or hammering new shingles to the far shed. The house seemed asleep, until a whistle rose, sudden, shrill. Helena ducked. Ellen froze. Old Red came running from the barn, shouting something about a loose mare and broken reins. Jed's second in command, a man named Price, cursed and went after him. Ellen didn't wait. She ran, fast and quiet, toward the edge of the yard where the shadows fell from the tool shed. Helena was already there. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Ellen handed her the knife. Helena pressed it to the rope binding the shed door. The knife slipped once, but didn't fall. The rope gave. Helena flung the door open, just enough to slip inside. Ellen followed. They crouched in the dark, breathing hard, eyes wide. Footsteps. Not Red's. Too heavy. Too slow. Jed. He hadn't gone to town. Not yet. His voice rang out, sharp and amused. I do like a bit of cleverness, Ellen. She rose, stepped into the light. Helena stayed hidden. Jed stood 10 feet away, hand on his belt, not yet at the gun. It's always the quiet ones, he said. You, especially. You've got that soft face, but you think too loud. Ellen said nothing. He stepped closer. The dust beneath his boots curled up like smoke. You could have had comfort, he whispered. Safety. Maybe even kindness. You sold that word a long time ago, she said. He laughed. Cold. Dry. Then he moved. But Ellen did too. The kitchen knife was not meant for fighting. But she'd sharpened it that morning, and she knew the angle of a ribcage better than most. It went in shallow, but it was enough. Jed staggered, clutched his side, cursed with a breath that cracked. Helena burst from the shed and ran. Not away. Toward her mother. They didn't finish him. They didn't stay. They ran together, toward the northern edge of the property where the fence had been loosened, where hope waited in the form of a knotted rope and a man watching from a tree line. They didn't speak until they saw him. Luke. Helena gasped. Ellen stopped running. Her knees trembled, but her voice was calm. He's coming, she said. Luke nodded once. No questions. Then he turned and led them into the dust. Behind them, the wind rose, and the ranch shrank into a blur of fences and smoke. But the dust never forgot. And neither did they. The forest they fled into was not thick, but it was enough. Enough to hush hooves and hide breath, to make the world feel bigger than fences and barns and cruel-eyed men. Trees here leaned like old women at prayer, and the ground softened under moss and needles. The sky, framed in shifting green, gave them cover where law could not. Luke didn't lead with words. He led with knowing. A flick of his hand meant quiet. A glance over his shoulder meant pause. Ellen followed without resistance, Helena close behind, her breath high in her chest like a bird trying not to be heard. They moved for hours, north and east, away from roads, away from eyes. The farther they went, the more the silence became not fear, but balm. They made camp in a hollow of pines near a cold stream that whispered in the dark. Luke had a stash there, a blanket, some jerky, a pouch of dried beans. No fire. Not yet. Smoke would be a beacon. Instead, they ate what they could with trembling hands. When Helena shivered, Ellen drew her close and wrapped them both in Luke's coat. He did not offer it with words. He simply placed it beside them and sat down nearby, eyes scanning the trees like a man who had learned to read silence as scripture. That first night, none of them truly slept. Ellen kept one hand on Helena's shoulder and the other wrapped around a sharpened stick she'd carved by moonlight. Luke rested with his back against a tree, hat pulled low, one boot pressed to the earth like he was listening for the past. By morning, the world was still theirs. No dogs. No men. Just dew and birdsong. But they knew it wouldn't last. Luke led them to a cabin 2 days' ride farther north, tucked in the crook of a ravine where the wind rarely reached. It was a place he'd built long ago, when solitude was his only comfort. It had one room, a single bed, a broken chair, and windows covered in muslin to keep out light. There, they stopped running. For now. Ellen wasted no time. She cleaned the space until it smelled like soap and wood instead of old smoke and despair. Helena gathered stones for a fire ring and used the heel of a boot to grind dry herbs into powder. Luke disappeared each day into the trees and returned with meat, mushrooms, and once, a stack of brittle pages torn from a newspaper he'd found abandoned in a trapper's lodge. He gave them to Helena. She read each line aloud that night with a voice more steady than it had been in weeks. It was not safety, but it was breath. In the quiet days that followed, something began to grow between them. Not romance, not yet, but something deeper. Familiarity. Trust forged in glances, in the way Luke left his rifle closer to Ellen than to himself, or the way Helena laughed at nothing just to hear herself sound alive again, and Luke didn't stop her. One afternoon, Ellen found herself humming, just under her breath, a half-forgotten tune she used to sing while folding laundry, back when Helena was small and life hadn't yet hardened around her like a shell. When she noticed the sound, she stopped, embarrassed. But Luke only looked up from where he was sharpening a blade and said, "Real soft, that's a good song." The silence between them shifted then, not broken, but filled. Helena, meanwhile, changed more quickly. The confinement at Rourke Ranch had done something to her, pressed her into something sharper, more aware. She asked to learn how to trap rabbits, how to shoot straight, how to tell time by the sky. Luke taught her without ceremony, and Ellen watched as her daughter grew steadier, less fragile. There was still light in her, but it had learned to wear armor. One night, as they sat near the fire pit eating stew from a single tin bowl, Helena asked Luke why he helped them. He stirred the stew, slow. His voice came like wind through dry grass. "Because I was too late once," he said. "Didn't want to be again." Helena didn't ask more. Ellen didn't need to. She saw it in his eyes, the memory that held him like a shadow. He hadn't just seen cruelty before. He'd carried it. Later, after Helena had gone to sleep, Ellen and Luke sat by the coals. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "What did you lose?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. But finally he did. "A sister," he said. "They took her for spite. I was out mending fence. Came back to a house with broken windows and no sound." Ellen closed her eyes. She didn't reach for his hand. But she wanted to. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "It never leaves," he said. "Just settles deeper." From then on, their movements became more deliberate. Luke began scouting the road again. Not because they'd been found, but because they would be. Sooner or later. Rourke wouldn't let go without hunting. Power was his god, and he'd been shamed. He wouldn't rest. Caleb returned to the story one morning with a knock on the cabin door that sent Ellen to her feet, knife in hand. But when she saw his face, sunburnt, thinner, but unbroken, she dropped the blade. He'd come north with word. Town talk said Rourke was calling in favors. Hiring bounty hunters. The law wouldn't touch it, not with so many hands in Rourke's pocket. But there were men who didn't mind getting blood on their boots for coin. Caleb stayed 2 days, long enough to rest and teach Helena how to swing a lasso right. Then he left again. Said he'd watch the roads from the south, send signal if he saw movement. The cabin grew tense. Not from fear, but preparation. They made plans. Luke carved escape paths into the trees with hidden markers only he understood. Ellen packed food into satchels. Helena drew maps in charcoal. Still, there were quiet moments that refused to be swallowed by the threat. One afternoon, as rain fell gentle and thin, Ellen and Luke stood beneath the porch overhang watching it stripe the earth. She leaned into the doorway, arms crossed. "You don't talk much," she said. "No need to," he answered. "You ever wanted to?" He looked at her then, and something passed between them. Something not spoken, not rushed. His eyes were tired but clear. "Only with the right person," he said. She didn't smile. But she stayed beside him until the rain stopped. That night, Helena asked her mother if they were ever going to stop running. Ellen tucked a blanket around her and answered with a softness she didn't know she still possessed. "We're not running. We're surviving." Helena looked at her, eyes searching. "Do you still believe people can be good?" Ellen's breath caught. "Yes," she said, "but only because some of them have shown me how." Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and old water. The moon rose behind clouds, a pale promise. Luke stood watch at the edge of the woods, one hand resting lightly on his holster. He didn't believe in fate, but he did believe in timing. And he felt something coming. In the days that followed, more messages came. Caleb sent word of movement near the southern bend, 2 riders, asking questions, flashing silver coins. Men who didn't smell like ranchers. Ellen read the note aloud and folded it with care. Then she placed it beneath her pillow, not out of sentiment, but readiness. Luke sat her down after supper. His voice was gravel but kind. "We might have to run again." Ellen didn't flinch. "Then we run." He looked at her for a long moment. Not like a man appraising value, but like someone memorizing something holy. "You're not who he thought you were," Luke said. "Rourke. He thought you'd break." She shook her head. "He never understood that silence isn't weakness. It's where strength grows." Luke smiled, just barely. "That night," she sang. Not loudly. Not for an audience. Just a verse of something old, something she'd carried so long it had become part of her bones. Luke heard it from the doorway. He didn't go inside. Just sat down near the steps, leaned back, and let the sound carry. And the next morning, a mark appeared on a tree at the edge of the ridge, a red ribbon tied in a figure 8. Helena found it first. She touched it once and ran back, hair streaming behind her like a flame. They were coming. The night began with stillness, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the skin, that made the pulse slow not from calm but anticipation. Every tree stood like a witness, every gust of wind a messenger. The forest didn't sleep. It waited. Ellen sat on the cabin's wooden floor, back against the wall, her fingers winding and unwinding a length of thread she'd pulled from a torn hem. Across from her, Luke stood by the window, watching the tree line where the last of the day had vanished. Helena dozed lightly near the hearth, wrapped in 2 blankets, her breath thin, her fists curled beneath her chin like a child trying to keep the world at bay. They'd eaten little. Not from lack, but appetite had left with the daylight. Caleb hadn't returned. He was supposed to. The plan had been simple. Watch the southern bend, mark the road, return by dusk. But the sun had dropped, and no sound came through the woods. No crunch of dry twigs. No signal. Not even a bird call. Ellen knew better than to panic. But dread had a way of making its home in the ribs. It settled in hers like a second heartbeat. She didn't voice it, though. She let Luke be the eyes. She stayed still. There was no plan for tonight. Only waiting. Only readiness. Luke finally turned from the window. His voice came low, deep, measured. "If they're close, they'll wait for dark. They want surprise." Ellen nodded. Her fingers didn't stop moving. "Do we run?" "No," he said. "Not tonight." Helena stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, like it hurt to wake. "Did they find him?" "We don't know," Ellen whispered. Helena sat up. Her face looked older in the firelight, cheekbones sharper, eyes hollowed from days without rest. But there was steel in her now. Whatever part of her had been soft for the world was gone. Luke paced once, then knelt by the door and began unrolling a canvas bundle. Inside were tools of quiet violence, a small pistol, a hunting knife, wire, and a slender coil of rope. Helena watched, and for the first time, didn't flinch. "Who taught you to fight like that?" she asked. "My father taught me how to shoot," Luke said. "The rest I learned from losing." Ellen said nothing, but her fingers stilled. The fire had been reduced to coals. No more wood would be added. Smoke was risk. Light was risk. They would sit in the dark, feel the world with their skin, and wait. Ellen finally rose and walked to the cupboard where she'd hidden the revolver. It wasn't hers, not truly. It had belonged to one of Jed's men, dropped in the dirt the night they escaped. She'd picked it up without thinking, cleaned it twice since. She held it now as if testing the weight of a choice already made. Helena stood too. "Teach me," she said. Ellen met her daughter's gaze. This wasn't a child asking. This was a woman ready to bear her own name. She showed her how to load the cylinder, how to brace her wrist, how to breathe before squeezing. They practiced once, twice, then no more. Enough to know. Enough to act. Luke watched them both and said nothing. Hours passed. The moon rose but offered no comfort, just a pale reminder of how exposed they really were. The wind changed direction. That mattered. It always did. Then came the sound. Not loud, but there. A horse's breath, snorting once into the night air. A twig cracked. Then another. Luke stood. Ellen followed. Helena slipped the revolver into her belt like it belonged there. They didn't speak. There were 3 of them, men dressed not like cowboys but like shadows. No spurs. No loose buckles. Faces half covered. They moved like hunters, confident, rehearsed. Luke waited until they came into view, just past the edge of the trees. Then he stepped outside, slow, hands empty but firm at his sides. "Evening," he said. One of the men laughed. Not out of humor, just the tired, mean sound of someone who thought the ending was already written. "You, Luke?" Luke didn't answer. "We're here for the girl. Boss says to bring her back breathing. No promises for the rest of you." Luke stepped forward. "And if we say no?" The man shrugged. "Ain't really up to you." Inside the cabin, Ellen pressed Helena toward the rear wall. There was a trapdoor there, old but functional. Luke had carved it weeks ago, leading to a small crawlspace dug by his own hands, just deep enough to hide a heartbeat. "Go," Ellen whispered. "No," Helena said. "You go when I say. Not because you're weak. Because I'm your mother." Helena swallowed, nodded, slipped through. Ellen turned back toward the door. Outside, the standoff hadn't moved. Luke's voice cut through the cold. "I've got no quarrel with you. Walk away." One of the men stepped forward. "She ain't yours. You're just a fence. And fences break." The next moment happened in silence. Luke's knife flashed. The man went down. The second reached for his gun, but Ellen was already at the door, revolver raised. She didn't hesitate. One shot. Not clean, but true. The third man ran. Smart. Gone before Luke could turn. Inside, Helena climbed back up, wide-eyed but dry-cheeked. Luke dragged the wounded one into the trees, tied him tight with the rope he'd unrolled hours ago. He returned with blood on his sleeve. "He'll talk when the sun rises," Luke said. Ellen lowered her revolver. The dead man lay near the steps, his face slack, eyes open. The smell of iron and smoke clung to the air like judgment. Helena didn't look away. Luke turned toward them. "They'll come again. Next time with more." "Then we don't wait," Ellen said. Luke nodded, but his shoulders slumped. The weight of what must come had finally settled. They spent the rest of the night burying the body, deep and silent. Ellen said no prayers. Helena placed a stone at the head. By dawn, Caleb returned. He limped, hat missing, shirt torn, but alive. "They saw me," he gasped. "I pulled them south, lost the trail. But they know now. There'll be more by tomorrow." Ellen gave him water. Luke gripped his shoulder. "You did good." Helena helped clean the cut on his temple. She didn't smile, but her hands were gentle. By midday, the decision had been made. They wouldn't run again. Not like prey. They would move, yes, but with purpose. Toward something, not just from. Ellen sat by the fire pit, sharpening a stick to a point. Not because she needed it, but because it helped her think. "We find a place we choose," she said. "Set the ground. Make them come to us." Luke nodded. "There's a canyon near here. Narrow. Easy to guard. We lead them there," Helena said. "Like they're driving us." "And then what?" Caleb asked. "Then we let them see what fences are for," Ellen said. "Not to keep things in, but to keep danger out." The longest night passed not in terror, but in resolve. Something had broken. Not in them, but in the order of things. No longer hunted. No longer silent. By evening, they packed. Left the cabin behind. Left the grave. Left the memory. The path ahead was not smooth, but it was theirs. As they walked, Ellen looked back only once. She did not mourn. She planned. The canyon waited like a held breath, narrow, quiet, a mouth in the earth wide enough to swallow sound and secret. They reached it at dusk, the sky bruised violet behind them. Trees fell away into stone walls, their bark replaced by cool slabs of shale and sandstone. The trail narrowed until even Luke had to walk sideways in parts, leading the horses single file while the others kept watch. Each hoofstep echoed off the stone like a slow drum. It was the place he'd spoken of, twisting paths, ridgelines flanked by steep drop-offs, one way in and one way out. If a trap were to be set, it would be here. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. Here, the land did not pretend. It either held you or it didn't. They made camp deep in the throat of the gorge where the sun touched only briefly before retreating into shadow. Helena and Caleb gathered wood with care, dragging dry branches down from the overhang. Luke built the fire low and close to the cliff wall. Ellen lined stones around it, her fingers steady, deliberate. Her body remembered war now. How to listen, how to move with breath instead of panic. There was no talk of retreat, only preparation. The wounded man they'd left tied in the woods had given them enough. Names, numbers, directions. Rourke had hired 5 more to ride north. Bounty men. Greedy, careless, but skilled. Paid in advance. Promised more if they returned Helena breathing and Ellen willing. No mention of Luke or Caleb. They were obstacles, nothing more. But Ellen knew men like Rourke. She'd known them in saloons and shops, in the crooked mouth of her husband, in every hand that had ever rested too long on her arm. Men like him wanted obedience, not understanding. He hadn't counted on quiet people who moved like water. He hadn't imagined that silence could harden into stone. That night, she sat beside Helena near the fire. Her daughter rested her head against her shoulder, not as a girl might, but as a partner in something irrevocable. There was still fear in her. But it lived beside resolve now, not beneath it. "Are you ready?" Ellen asked softly. Helena didn't open her eyes. "I've been ready since the night he touched my shoulder and smiled like he owned the air I breathed." Ellen kissed her forehead. "Then you're stronger than I ever was." Helena turned her face up. "No. You just never let anyone see." In the dark, Luke worked alone, digging a narrow trench across the path's curve, laying down caltrops he'd shaped from old nails and iron scraps. Caleb strung a wire across the trail, low and invisible in moonlight. They moved like men who'd waited years to do something right. By morning, they were ghosts among the rocks. Ellen took high ground, rifle in hand. Luke stood at the choke point near the bend, where riders would have to dismount. Caleb crouched behind a stone ledge, revolver gripped in both hands, jaw tight. Helena was nowhere visible, tucked in a narrow crevice behind the trail's edge. A sharp knife sat across her lap. She breathed slow. The first shot wasn't fired by them. It came from the north, a warning crack that split the sky. Then came the thunder of hooves. 5 riders. Dust in their wake, the sun behind them. Ellen sighted down the barrel of her rifle. Her fingers did not tremble. The lead rider slowed, saw the canyon's shape, the turn in the trail, and gave a signal. The others stopped. Then came the voice. "Bring out the girl," it said. "Make it easy." Luke stepped forward. The echo carried his calm like scripture. "You're not leaving here with anything but regret." Laughter answered. "We've done this before, friend. We ain't afraid of rock and dirt." Luke didn't move. He didn't speak again. The man signaled, and 2 riders advanced. That's when the wire caught the first. His horse reared, screaming. The man was thrown sideways, struck the stone wall with a sickening crack. The second shouted, wheeled his horse around. Ellen fired. The bullet took him in the thigh. He tumbled, clutching his leg, swearing as he rolled to the ground. The canyon came alive then. One of the others dismounted and ran for cover, gun drawn. Caleb rose from behind the rocks and fired. Missed. Then again, this time striking the man in the arm. He collapsed behind a tree trunk dragged there by the stream. 2 left. 1 still mounted. 1 stayed back, not moving, not firing. Watching. Helena watched from her hollow. Every breath was a drumbeat in her chest. The knife felt warm in her hands. Then the last rider spoke. "Ellen McAllister, you and I need to talk." The name hit the air like thunder. Ellen lowered the rifle and stepped out from cover, but not without keeping her hand on the trigger. The rider dismounted, slow, deliberate. His boots crunched gravel. His hat shadowed his face until he was close enough to lift it. Jedediah Rourke. His smile was like a cut. "You've caused me quite a bit of trouble," he said. Ellen didn't reply. Her heart beat slow. The sun caught her hair, her eyes. She looked like nothing he remembered. "You could have had comfort," he said again. "A house, food, safety. You offered a cage," she answered. "And what do you call this?" he asked, gesturing at the chaos. At his wounded men. At the blood on the stone. Ellen didn't blink. "I call this earned." He drew his weapon. But Helena moved before the shot rang out. She rose from the crevice like smoke, sprinting low, silent. Rourke turned too late. The blade sank into his side. He grunted, staggered. Ellen fired once. The bullet hit just above the heart. Not fatal, but final. He dropped to one knee, blood soaking through his coat. "You think this changes anything?" he gasped. "It already has," Ellen said. Luke stepped forward and took the gun from Rourke's limp hand. Behind them, the remaining bounty men dropped their weapons. Caleb approached, face pale, blood on his sleeve from a graze. He looked to Ellen, then to Helena, who stood with the knife still in her hand. She dropped it. "It's done," she said. Rourke lived, but barely. Luke tied him to a mule and sent 2 of the wounded men south with him. Word was left in their hands. Return him to town, let the sheriff decide whether power still mattered. None of them expected justice. But none of them feared him anymore. They stayed in the canyon 2 days, long enough to breathe again. Then they moved north, deeper into the hills. Found a stream, an old logging camp, a few acres untouched by claims or greed. There, they built something new. Luke carved a cabin with his hands. Ellen grew food in long rows. Helena rode each morning, the mare from the ranch now hers again, strong and sleek. Caleb came and went. He had fire in his feet. But he always returned. Time passed. And with it, the tension loosened its grip. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridgeline and the sky turned to honey, Ellen sat on the porch with a journal in her lap. Her fingers moved slow over the page, ink trailing like memory. Inside, Helena played a tune on the music box Luke had given her. The sound was thin but sweet, a ribbon of sound curling into the air. Ellen looked up, toward the trees, toward the trail that had once been a place of blood. She didn't cry. She smiled. Luke stepped out from the shadows, carrying kindling. His eyes found hers, and he nodded once. She stood, took one piece from his arms, and brushed a loose hair from her cheek. They didn't need words. Not now. Love had grown not from passion but presence. A quiet thing. A certain thing. And maybe that's all anyone really wants. Not to be rescued, but to be seen. To be safe without being small. To be free without being alone. As night fell, Ellen read the last line of her page aloud, her voice just above the hush of the wind. "Whatever they take, don't let them quiet the part of you that still sings." The sky opened wide above them, and the stars, at last, looked like hope.